Next, we'll move on to the draft Tier 1 evaluation results. So yes, so we're looking at the range of alternatives that I described earlier. And we'll go over those in detail a little bit later, especially the bus transit technologies, bus rapid transit, streetcar, and light rail. We'll talk about those a little more in detail. But again, on the right were the routes that were also considered as part of the Tier 1. Next slide. So we also included a no build option, and this represents what exists today. As you can see on the right, there's the MCTS purple line, which is the no build option. So it's sort of like, what if we didn't do anything in this quarter? What would we have? And we'd have the purple line, which runs mostly on 27th Street and makes its way over to Bayshore and down to IKEA in Oak Creek. And so really it's used as a base to compare the other alternatives. So, so that is our no build option. Next slide. So for the 3 transit types, bus rapid transit, rapid streetcar, and light rail, they all have similarities in that they would all have enhanced stops, or we call them stations, with off-board ticketing, level boarding, so that strollers, wheelchairs, and carts can be rolled right onto the bus from the station, no stairs. And there would be notification in the station for when the next transit vehicle is arriving. So it's a little more user-friendly when you're waiting for the vehicle. But for bus rapid transit, the bus would run in the roadway, and it would have at least 50% dedicated lane just for the BRT service. Its stations would be spaced about a half mile apart. For rapid streetcar, that would run on the street as well, but on tracks that would be installed in the roadway. And the route would be at least 50% in dedicated lanes. And station spacing would be about a quarter mile to a half mile apart. So it's a little bit different than the Milwaukee Hop, but the tracks and the vehicle are similar. For light rail, we have, again, it would be on the roadway, with the tracks would be installed on the roadway. Here you can see there's a little bit of a separation between the transit vehicle and the regular traffic lanes. And for light rail, the route is usually entirely or nearly entirely in dedicated lanes, with stations spacing a half mile or more apart. So those are the transit vehicle options. So then we looked at some factors that we use to evaluate those transit technology types. So we looked at typical capacity, so kind of a right size mode for this corridor. How many riders do we expect, and which service would be able to handle those riders the best? Typical service characteristics, kind of the scheduling, frequency, time of day, environmental characteristics, potential to bring in development or catalyze those developments, consistency with corridor character, which is sort of like, what's there now and what would fit in best with the neighborhood, consistency with local and regional plans. So we looked at the Sewer Pack 2050 plan, Vision 2050, and the local city and neighborhood plans to see, what are they planning for? Is it, enhanced transit or just the service that's there today, and those kinds of things. And then we looked at typical per mile capital costs. So with all of these together, you can kind of see light rail has a couple red dots, and green, yellow, and red represent green is the best, yellow is medium, and red is kind of not the best. So with the typical per mile capital cost, there's a big difference there between light rail, streetcar, and BRT. With BRT, it can basically use what's on the roadway right now, just with a little bit of a striping change. And with light rail and rapid streetcar, we have those installed rails in the roadway. And most likely there would be some overhead catenary wires to power the vehicles for the rail options. In the case of light rail, there's also a safety gate that would be required at some intersections. So all of those things add up. They would all have the same relative costs for the improved stations, but that's where the cost landed. So with all of these factors considered, we decided to advance the bus rapid transit into the tier 2 evaluation. And we're not saying, we did get a lot of comments regarding rail. So we're not saying, rail couldn't be considered in this corridor at some time if there was, more transit funds available. But at this time, that's where we are. So we're moving with bus rapid transit, and next slide. And then all of those same route options would be available for bus rapid transit, except on rail on the 30th Street corridor. That is the paved roadway that would be installed next to the rails on the 30th Street corridor. So, all right, next slide. So for those routes, we also did an evaluation of those with several factors. So we have each of the transit routes are listed on the left, and then the factors that we considered are at the top. So the segment characteristics, we looked at population and employment centers that would be served, as well as points of interest in the corridor. For congestion, we were looking at basically traffic congestion and where we would have some opportunities to have a dedicated lane for BRT. And then accessibility, we were looking at those underserved populations. So better service for people of color, low income populations, those with disabilities, and those who don't have access to a car. And for environmental impacts, we looked at parklands and other natural areas around the transit route alignments, but since those wouldn't disturb any of those factors, they all got a green. Consistency with corridor character, again, that's sort of looking at, does this make sense to put BRT on each of these route options? And the north option 4 got a red there. That's the 30th Street corridor. And that was basically because it's a rail corridor for one thing. And then most of the developments or the businesses along that 30th Street corridor, the rails are to the back of those developments. And some of the access to the rail corridor just wasn't as easy as the on-street option. So that one got a red. And again, we're not saying that, the 30th Street corridor shouldn't be used for passenger service. In fact, we are looking at including an appendix to the tier 1 analysis that would talk about how the 30th Street corridor could be used as a commuter rail corridor that would serve the 30th Street corridor, but would really best serve from the 30th Street corridor to downtown and beyond. So we will have some information available on our website about that as well. So in the evaluation, the North 1 option, North 2 option to Bay Shore via Silver Spring, we're moving forward with those. The central segment, of course, from 27th Street or on 27th Street from Lisbon to Drexel, then to Northwestern Mutual Campus in Franklin, Drexel Town Square on Drexel, and to Ascension Hospital in Franklin. Now the North option 1 and South option C to Brown Deer and Ascension of Franklin, those far north and south segments. Those tend to get less dense with population and development. And the length is, it gets a little longer to those destinations. So we've carried those forward, but they may not make it through to the next round, or we may consider something called an open BRT system where like every other bus would serve those options. So one bus would go to Bayshore, the next would go to Brown Deer, one bus would go to Drexeltown Square, the next would go to Ascension and Franklin. So we wanted to keep those on the table, and so we're looking at those in a little more detail. All right. So after that evaluation, we have the remaining range of alternatives. We have the bus rapid transit as the transit technology, and the routes that we're looking at go from Brown Deer over to Bayshore, along Teutonia, connecting to 27th Street, all the way down to Drexel, to the Northwestern Mutual Campus, over to Drexeltown Square, and down to Ascension Hospital in Franklin. That is what we have carried through to Tier 2. And then we want to talk a little bit about the feedback that we've received, because we did show these options at the last round of public meetings. And so some of the feedback that we got, we asked folks how well they think each transit type would fit within this 27th Street corridor specifically. This is the little chart on the right. And so they're all fairly similar, but BRT did get slightly more support. And then with the route options on the left, 30th Street Rail Corridor got a lot of support. So did the option to go up to Brown Deer, Bayshore via Silver Spring, and then Bayshore via Hampton also got some support. And on the south route options, Drexeltown Square got the most support, followed by Ascension Hospital in Franklin, and then Northwestern Mutual Campus in Franklin.